Welcome to my senior capstone project. I am Anaya. I'm a pastor at Shepherd Church, the small groups director specifically. Shepherd Church is located in Porter Ranch, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles County, found in the northwest end of the San Fernando Valley. As you can see, my presentation today is what does it mean to reach the police officers in the San Fernando Police Department? Every single graduating class is tasked with the same capstone project. And sort of the phrase is, how does the gospel come to bear upon a specific people group? Now, that people group needs to be very narrow. In other words, you can't just say, oh, I want to reach the people of Papua New Guinea. Well, is there a specific region in Papua New Guinea that you want to reach? And if so, how? So part of it is going to be to identify a said people group and then give some very practical applications of how you do that. So today, what you're going to hear from me is why the San Fernando Police Department, and then also why now. And so part of it is I started as a volunteer chaplain in 2023, and it came about because there's a woman in our church by the name of Vanessa Sabalos. And Vanessa Sabalos is involved in an organization known as PAC. And essentially it's the Police Advisory Council. Thank you, sir. One of the things that they seek to do is to bridge the gap between funds and community and the police department, as I understand it. So because she is part of the PAC and she's part of Shepherd Church, she happened to be within the vicinity or an earshot of sort of lead members of the San Fernando Police Department stating that they were seeking a chaplain for the department. And she's like, I got a guy for you. So if this goes wrong, we can blame Vanessa Sabalos for that. So that's how this whole thing came about. The other thing that I found out is that San Fernando Police Department has never had an official chaplain. There have been different pastors over the years who have helped, perhaps have helped as being a liaison between the San Fernando Police Department and members of the community, but to have an official, uniformed and badged chaplain, this is the first time in the history of the city of San Fernando. One of the things to know about the San Fernando Police Department, I'll get a little bit into the history of the actual city of San Fernando, is that it's a very small, close-knit department, but there is some deep relational potential within this department. Unlike larger departments like Los Angeles Police Department, which again, San Fernando is located in the San Fernando Valley. It is a suburb of greater Los Angeles County. However, it's been incorporated since 1911, and so therefore, we have our own mayor, we have our own city council, we have our own police department, we have our own chief of police. And so because of that, we have allocated funds for 35 sworn officers, which is on our books. And so having that size of a department, chaplaincy, as I'm learning, is actually ideal for that size department. The other thing that's important to note that hopefully you will hear as part of this presentation today is that ministry flows through presence, not programming. And here's what I mean by that, is that I did not show up to the San Fernando Police Department and say, hey, welcome me, and this is what we're going to do. It's actually been quite the opposite. It's been a matter of being present there for the officers, both men and women, listening to the narrative, and I'll get a little bit into how that's actually done very practically. But it's very fascinating because it's such a close-knit agency, there are some pros and there are some cons, which we'll get into here in a second. But the way that we actually do that is we do that through what we call cultural exegesis. And cultural exegesis is actual process, a 5-step process. I'm going to break it down into these 3 steps. So Sarge is smiling already because what he sees that I helped myself to many pictures from our monthly newsletters that we get because they're nice high-res pictures of the San Fernando Police Department. But what you're going to learn here is that there's actually a methodology by which to reach a specific people group. And in order for us to properly understand what is written in scriptures and how it practically applies to any given culture, it must go through a cultural exegesis process. And so here's what we're going to discover today, is that my first step was actually to learn the story. And it was to learn the story of San Fernando. Incorporated in 1911, San Fernando has always had an identity that is rooted in autonomy, in cultural pride, and in local governance. What's very fascinating is that back in 1886, Senator Charles Maclay endowed the Maclay School of Theology. And that was an extension of the University of Southern California, and it was located in the city of San Fernando. And so I found it quite fascinating because as I got to hear and learn the story of the city of San Fernando, I thought, how fitting is it that here I am over 100 years later, and that the origins of this small city, which was rooted in once having a school of theology, would welcome back a chaplain into its own city. But that's a testimony of God's provision. That's a testimony of God's grace. And I believe that it's a testimony of God's providence for this city. The other thing that we learn about this story is that God is never done with a story. And here's what I mean by that, is that when God intends to reach a certain community or a people group, just because we haven't been actively involved doesn't mean that he has stopped. It doesn't mean that the redemptive work of Christ is not happening. It doesn't mean that the redemptive work of the Spirit is not in action. One of the things that is important for me as I enter into the story is to humble myself before an almighty God and say, what is it that you have been actively doing here? And where can I tap in? Where the Spirit leads is where I follow. The second part of this process is to draw out themes and identify expressions. Now, let me talk a little bit about that, because identifying themes and drawing out expressions can be a little bit complicated. You see, in order to contextualize the gospel for the San Fernando Police Department, it's essential not only to understand their values and their struggles, but also to observe the realities that are expressed in everyday rhythms, in language, in symbols, and environments. Because these expressions serve as cultural liturgies, and they shape how officers think, how they feel, and how they act, and oftentimes this happens subconsciously. So the following examples are going to illustrate the values of duty, camaraderie, suppression, and identity, and how they're lived out amongst the men and the women of the San Fernando Police Department. We'll get into that. And then step number 3 is biblical integration. Now, what do I mean by biblical integration? Well, again, that phrase of how does the gospel come to bear upon a specific people group? You see, one of the difficult things about understanding theology, there's a beautiful quote from a book that left an impression on me many years ago by Tim Chester and Steve Timms. And there's a quote in this book that says that the theology that matters is not the theology that we profess, but the theology that we practice. So it's important for us to understand that it's not just what we know biblically, it's actually what we're able to identify. What we're able to identify in any given culture when we look at the narrative of Christ and we look at his redemptive work, then we have to be able to contextualize that message to this specific culture. Biblical integration is key in order to make this happen. Without this as without this as being part of our exegesis process, we will miss the mark. Because too often we know too much about the Bible, but we don't actually know how it engages and permeates every sector of culture. So, what's the first step? The first step is downloading higher resolution pictures, unlike mine on my first slide. The first step is actually learning the story. Learning the story that San Fernando was incorporated in 1911 and it remained independent. And there's a certain city pride that we are our own city. You just walk around town. I know many residents in the city of San Fernando, and they are very quick to tell you that San Fernando is better than living in LA proper. It's I think technically it's 2.28 square miles, if I'm not mistaken. We round it up here because there's a couple of local resources that round it up to 2.4 square miles of local governance and local policing. 2.4 square miles, that is not a big city, not at all. And so just understanding that there's sort of this saying in San Fernando that everybody knows each other in San Fernando. And I've been in the city of San Fernando with several of you at different times, whether we're engaging over some tacos, some guacamole, maybe some churros from Horchateria, or Sarge's recent favorite place, the Italian place, whatever the name of that is, which, by the way, I had a panna cotta there for the first time, and it's pretty stinking good. Everybody knows each other in San Fernando. There's a strong relational culture, but there's also limited resources. Hence why there is a volunteer chaplain that is a part of the department. The other part of it is San Fernando Police Department, the culture is shaped by legacy and by pride and neighborhood roots. I can't tell you how much pride these guys take in what they do. I can't even begin to express to you what it means to them and now to me to wear this uniform and to say, I am not me, but them, that they are a police officer in the city of San Fernando. I have been on ride-alongs and I have seen them engage different members of the community. And I remember my first ride-along specifically with the first officer that I was with. And I remember we pulled up to this little local play area, and he rolled down his windows, and there was a mother and two little kids. And these two little kids, when they saw the police vehicle, they started jumping up and down and they started waving at them. And that was a much different cultural experience than I had anticipated in a ride along. Because contrary to popular belief, there are still communities that welcome policing in their communities. So these two little boys are flagging us down. And so the officer pulls over, rolls down the window, and he says, "Hey, you guys need a badge. What are you doing out here? You guys want a badge?" And they said, "Yeah." Sure enough, puts the car in park, takes down a couple of stickers. They have these really neat badge stickers, and he deputizes both of them right there in front of their mother. And I got to tell you that seeing that interaction between this police officer and these two children, it began to mold and shape my heart in a way that I didn't imagine. It actually made me quite emotional because here I am thinking, man, there is this cultural rhetoric of what the police is and who the police department is. And yet that cultural rhetoric is often fear-mongered by media. And that may not necessarily be true in a community like the community of San Fernando. But we have to draw out these themes and identify these expressions. So some of the stuff that I'm going to begin to share, one of the studio member audience here today is actually my reporting sergeant. And he's been a part of the police department 16 years. And in the last 16 years that he's been there, he's moved up from the lowest of ranks, as they would call each other, a boot. And he is now part of command staff and oversees our detectives bureau. And so one of the things that you quickly learn is you sort of assess members of the San Fernando Police Department, and you see some of our officers here. One of them just transitioned over to being a reserve officer. But as you take a look at our officers here, man, these guys, they're fatigued. Friends, I'm going to be honest with you, they're overworked. It is not uncommon for a member of the San Fernando Police Department to work an 18, and an 18 is your regular 12-hour shift. And then you pick up another half a shift because we're either undermanned or we're undermanned. It's difficult as I make my ways in and out of the doors of the San Fernando Police Department to see how fatigue actually plays a role in their daily lives. You look at their eyes and I say, "Are you coming off of an 18?" And they're like, "Yes, sir." For me, it's that reminder is we have to find some rest. And let me just remind you that the God of the universe has something to say when it comes to rest. Brotherhood and emotional guardedness. You know, when I first came on board, I was told, hey, everybody's going to be nice to you. Everybody's going to be cordial. Forward facing, people are going to smile at you. They're going to say, yes, sir, no, sir. Hey, welcome aboard. But just know that we're a guarded bunch. Like, we're not going to immediately let you in. Just generally speaking, they're not very welcoming, not initially. Forward facing they are. But in terms of letting you in into who they are, that's going to take some work. So that's one of the themes that I had to identify. And the other one is honor culture. And I got to tell you that there is great honor in what they do. They take so much pride in their job. And at the end of the day, in order to put on this uniform every single day, part of putting on this uniform is you know that you're subjecting yourself to other members of the community, not these sweet two innocent children that put on sticker badges, but you've got members that are perhaps members of the San Fernando gang units. You have those that are drug dealers, and you have those that have no desire or no respect for these guys. And so there needs to be honor within the police department because these brothers need to have each other's backs. Because sometimes the feeling is it's us versus them. And so what are some of the expressions that we draw? Well, there's this wellness program that started recently. And I've been privy to this wellness program because as it was sort of in its genesis and it was being structured, I was asked for my opinion on, hey, would you be willing to come in and do the first 15 to 20 minute portion of this wellness program? And I jokingly said, well, what else are we doing? They said, well, we're doing jujitsu and yoga. And I said, can I roll around in the mat with jujitsu? And one officer says, well, we don't want you to get hurt. And to which I replied, well, I don't want to get hurt either. But I mean, I've rolled around on a mat and I didn't want to give my wrestling resume at the time, but I did want to lace them up with them. I knew how important it was. You know, many years ago, my dad gave me the advice as I was managing a small company in Van Nuys. And he said, in order for you to gain their favor, you must become one of them. Now, my father was not a Christian, but that Philippians 2, this incarnational ministry of Jesus becoming fully man in order to have a full human experience and take on the form of a servant, this incarnational ministry is so important. And in my own sort of mini-me version of that, I knew that rolling around with some of these guys doing some jujitsu was going to get me some initial buy-in, just so that they knew that I was willing to lace them up with them. Long shifts. I can't express that enough. The fatigue and the long shifts. Caffeine. Boy, do they love caffeine. So much so that the department recently very graciously accepted this beautiful donation of this refrigerator about this size and about this wide, and it's sponsored by Monster. And they, for free, will fill this cooler with Monster drinks. And everybody's super excited about it, and it's not uncommon for somebody to drink 2 of those Monsters in a day in addition to some of their coffee. And then humor as survival. Again, as I walk around the department and as I listen to conversations, one of the coping mechanisms is actually some pretty dark humor. Like, how else do you deal with some of the atrocities that you have to face as a police officer? What do you do with that? When you get called out to the specific call, and I will keep this PG, but there's children involved, and there's investigators involved, and there's arrests involved. And every part of your human nature, the justice within you of this adult who hurt this child, every part of you has to be restrained in order for you to uphold the law. And immediately after you're done from that call, you get another call, and this next call is a traffic collision. And that traffic collision is now under investigation. It is so fascinating to me that they're able to move so swiftly, so quickly, and so elegantly at times, from one call to the next to the next. And as you can imagine, in order for a human being to be able to do that, you have to have some sort of humor as survival. To be able to talk about some of those call outs in a joking type manner, even in a way of like in a boasting type manner of the calls that you've reported to. Another one of the expressions is through awards, through commendations and some informal structures. It's actually beautiful to see some of these police officers outside of the station, outside of the regular call of duty, and see them. And I've attended both an award ceremony. That's a very formal award ceremony, but everybody's dressed to the nines and having a good time. I've attended a poker night fundraiser with the police officers, and it was sort of like a casino night, and that was fun. Just seeing all of them, just sort of, for lack of a better term, unbutton the tie and let loose just a little bit and blow off a little bit of steam. But again, why are these things important to identify? Well, there's actually a method. There's a process in order to be able to exegete what is going on in this particular culture. And then lastly, like I said, biblical integration. Some of the gospel themes for police culture. You guys, these guys are tired. And you know who invites us to rest? It's Jesus. This idea of rest is so important. It's central. And more recently, I had a meeting with Spencer. He and I meet with him on a quarterly basis almost. And we talked about the idea of how am I resting? What example am I setting forth? And biblically speaking, am I being an image bearer of said rest? Because God designed and instituted rest because he rested after his beautiful creation. After 6 days and on the seventh day, God rests. So it's not just a mandate. It's not just a suggestion. It is essential to our survival. This idea of being able to integrate these biblical concepts to a police department in a way that is subtle, in a way that is clear, and in a way that is loving. Justice and mercy, sacrifice, incarnation. We talked about Philippians 2, Jesus being the incarnate Christ. Philippians 2, Colossians 1, we understand that Jesus really is the supreme of all creation. We understand that he took on the form of a servant. Before I took this position as a chaplain, I have a friend of mine who works for LAPD. And he said, Abe, are you going to be able to handle these guys? And I said, I don't know. What am I getting myself into? And his advice to me is, you must be willing to do everything and anything. And if somebody asks you to shine boots, you shine those boots as best as you can. And I knew what he was getting at. Again, it goes back to the same advice that my father had given me many years ago about running a small business. Is I knew that I had to be willing to become the lowest denominator within the department. And I'm still willing to do that. I haven't arrived anywhere yet. And so I'm constantly trying to look for places where I can sort of plug and play and be willing to do something for somebody. Because it's so important that I'm able to set that example, not to say, hey, look at me and look what I'm doing. More than it is Jesus said, let your light shine that your Father may receive glory. This idea of identity, of who they are. So much of their identity is wrapped up is in this uniform. So much of their identity is actually wrapped up in this badge. I often wonder for any one of our officers, if you strip them of a uniform and a badge, who are you? Who are you? What are you about? What is your identity? And so what I hope to continue to instill is to remind them that at the end of the day, God is not looking for a title and rank. God is not looking for how many chevrons you have on your uniform. God is not looking for how many ribbons you have. At the end of the day, God wants you to know that you are his beloved child and that his favor rests on you. And this idea of lament, the things that officers go through, it's atrocious, you guys. It's sad. I have reported to a couple of suicides, death by suicide. Now, because I'm not an investigative officer, because I'm not one that reports to the scene to figure out what happened, I report to the scene as the chaplain to be there for both my officers and to be there for the family members of the deceased. But for the officers to have to walk into a bathroom and identify a male, this age, this is probably what happened. They have to photograph the scene. They have to document it. They have to investigate it. They not only have to see this body once, but twice and 3 times and 4 times and 5 times. And by the time that scene gets cleared and the coroner's office gets called in, they would have spent hours with that body. At some point, you have to lament that loss. At some point, it is important to understand what you've experienced and what you've gone through. This idea of renewal, again, without biblical integration and without having a biblical framework to be able to minister to the men and the women of the police department, then what do we have? One of the things that the Word of God reminds us of is that He is God restoring us, redeeming us. He takes our broken hearts and He restores and He redeems them. He takes our trauma and He's able to heal us from that. There's a beautiful passage that reminds us, Paul says, that we are comforted by God. Praise be to God, the God of all comfort, who comforts us so that we may comfort others. You see, there's actual purpose behind us being comforted by God. It's always for us and it's always for others. That's the 3-step approach. But with that, there has to be some sort of shaping ministry. And so the shaping ministry that I looked at as I'm assessing this department is wellness as discipleship. Like, how do I reach the men and the women of the San Fernando Police Department without showing up and say, hey, I'm a pastor from Shepherd Church, and I want to help restore and redeem your life in the name of Jesus Christ? They're going to be like, chap, what are you talking about, dude? I thought you were just bringing me some tacos today, which I do, and I have, because we got to get some buy-in here. But very practically speaking, one of the ways that I'm able to bridge some of these gaps is, as I mentioned before, is these 15, 20-minute chaplain-led wellness devotionals. And so I've brought up some of the issues that we've already talked about rest. I've given very practical solutions to what that rest looks like. It's taking that same biblical motif and that same biblical truth, but pressing it through a filter with words that are coming out on the other side of it are palatable. They're relatable. They make sense to them. Now, if you're overly Christian, you hear me talking to them, you're like, Abe doesn't really sound like a pastor who's preaching on a Sunday morning. And your assessment of me would be correct, because that is not my intention. If I want them to close off, then I need to sound more and more like a pastor. And what I mean by a pastor, I mean one that preaches behind the pulpit on the weekend. But if I want them to open up, I need to be able to, once again, contextualize the biblical message and give it in doses and in increments that it's actually palatable. These 1 hour jujitsu plus 30 minutes of yoga, what it's equaled for me has been some trust and some openness. And so there I am on the yoga mat while some of my officers are farting next to me and they're making jokes about it. And I laugh along with them because it feels like a big locker room sometimes. And I'm okay with it. At times you hear some of the language that is used, they turn to me and say, "Sorry, chap," because they dropped another 4-letter word, as if that offends me. But it doesn't, because it helps me better understand who they are and what they're about. There's spiritual teaching that is done through example, friends, and not a sermon. I did not sign up to preach messages at the San Fernando Police Department, and I don't think that is why they hired me as their chaplain so much. But what I've been called to do is to love on the men and the women of the San Fernando Police Department and to lend a confidential ear to them. You see, for all of this will fall apart without confidentiality. And that's probably the number one thing, that's probably the loudest drum that I have beat over the course of this last year, is that whatever is entrusted to me, it is so important that it stays between us. Sarge, who's become a friend of mine, he will know if I come to him and I say, "Hey, Armando said this. Hey, Victor said that. Hey, Caleb said this. Hey, Spencer said that." He's a pretty smart guy. It's only a matter of time before he goes, if Chap comes and tells me all of these conversations he's having with them, then he might be going to other people and telling them the conversations I'm having with him. A friend of mine many years ago, very wise, said to me, if somebody gossips to you about others, there's a very good chance that they gossip about you to those same other people. Confidentiality is my priority. And that's why it must be done through example, not a sermon. Because officers, look at these guys. They don't respond to hype. They respond to humility. You know what they want to know is they see all the crazy guys. These are smart people. They're trained to assess people. I was so nervous starting this presentation, and my sergeant makes a joke and says, "You look more like a suspect right now than you do anything else." And it's true. Because we have these nervous tics. We have these certain things that we do when we're not right. They go through different levels of emotional intelligence, and some of them are more experienced in emotional intelligence than others. But they're going to know if I'm all hype, if I'm all talk, or if there's actually some humility behind the chap. So pastoral presence in crisis. Friends, ministry is done in the trenches when it comes to chaplaincy. The San Fernando Police Department, they respond to so many different calls that by the time I get a call, and this is new to our department, so it is not necessarily a protocol that if this happens, you must call the chaplain. That's not where we're at. It's actually more suggestive than it is mandatory. But as I'm building a rapport with officers, I very strategically say to them, "Hey, how was your shift?" And they tell me a little bit about it. "You have any calls today?" And they tell me about it. And I've said things like, "Hey, next time something like that happens, shoot me a text, man. Let me know. If I'm in the neighborhood, I'd be more than happy to just come along and just pay a quick visit." And sure enough, it has happened. Somebody ends up in the hospital, and I get the phone call and say, "Hey, last Halloween, there was a woman who was hit by a vehicle. And she happened to be at Holy Cross Hospital, right near where I live, and I was able to go and visit with her and her family. At other times, as I've mentioned, I've responded to death by suicide. Let me highlight this fatal accident that happened just under a year ago. And again, this is part of God's providence. This is part of God's timing. This is the work that God is doing. I just happen to be in His bigger story. I'd had dinner that night with my oldest daughter, and we were on our way home, and we were in the city of San Fernando. And on my way home, I saw fire trucks, I saw an ambulance, and I saw the San Fernando Police Department. I'm wearing a t-shirt and I'm wearing shorts, and I pull over to the side of the road, and I tell my daughter, you know what, let me just go check to see if everything is okay and if they need anything from me. I was relatively new to the department. It hadn't been that long since I'd been given this badge. And so I get out of the vehicle and I see one of the officers, one that I immediately recognize, and I say to him, hey, do you need my help with anything? And I could see that he's frantic, and he hands me a roll of caution tape. And he says, chap, can you do me a favor and rope off this area from that tree to that tree to that and just clear this perimeter for me? And he walks away from me. And I'm standing there with caution tape and shorts. And I go, sure. And I run back to the car and I grab my badge and I hang it around my neck so that the civilians that are there would at least know. They don't know that I'm just a chaplain, I'm not an officer, but at the very least, they would know that I'm official and that I'm a part of these guys. At that moment, I'm not ministering to anybody. At that moment, I'm not preaching out of the Beatitudes. At that moment, it is really incarnational ministry of seeing a need and meeting that need. Needless to say, the two people that were in one of the vehicles, they ended up dying that day. So then I was asked, at that point, our lieutenant shows up, our chief of police shows up, and they said, chaplain, would you mind coming back, because I was going to go home and change, and doing a death notification on behalf of the department? And I said, I'll do it. And we went to the home and we couldn't find them. After a Google search, I was able to see the person's profile on LinkedIn, and it turns out that they were connected to somebody that I grew up with, and I called the person I grew up with. I couldn't disclose to them why I was contacting them, but through this person, I was in contact with the deceased, his relative. We called him into the station. We gave them the news. They processed it right in front of us. And then this individual asked if I can go with him to Chatsworth, where his parents resided, to give them the news. I do that. And just when I thought I was done for the night, somebody says, who's going to tell mom? Because this whole time, mom was asleep inside of the house. So I did a death notification of the same person 3 times in the same night. And by this time, it's 2 a.m. That is something that an officer doesn't want to do. Let me rephrase that. That is something that an officer doesn't necessarily like to do. They will do it because it's needed, but that's not their favorite thing to do. If I can alleviate some of that, and if I can have a lens by which I can explain to a family who's grieving, and I can provide comfort and empathy, the same comfort and empathy that God has provided for me, that makes it easier in our department. Confidential prayers and requests and private follow-ups, these are so important. At this point, I have something that I started with several of my officers, and I've said to them, listen, one of the ways that we can keep this confidential is we can meet outside of the department. I have an office at the church, and we can meet at the church. Another thing is we can meet off-site. We don't have to be in the city of San Fernando. If you want me to come on a ride-along with you, you just tell me and I'll get on a ride-along. Nobody will know what we talked about. And yet, if you want to just text me or call me, you can do that as well. And if you don't feel like explaining to me what is going on, you can simply send me an emoji. So I've asked several of our officers to identify an emoji, whatever emoji they want. You don't have to explain anything to me. All you do is you just text me that emoji, and that alerts your chaplain that I need to be praying for you. And you know how cool it is to receive an emoji in the middle of my day? You know how neat it is for me to look at that emoji and to stop everything that I'm doing in order to pray for my officers. I don't preach, I remain. It's important to be there for them. I'm doing a lot more preaching today than you will ever hear me do in San Fernando Police Department, because that's a much different role and a much different approach. It's sacred ground where trauma meets truth. It is so important for us to practice the ministry of presence in a time of crisis. Another way is just relational discipleship. Breaking bread is greater than Bible studies. Now, if some pastors heard me say this, they'd be like, what are you talking about? How can that be greater? There's nothing greater than studying the Bible. I think there is. How about applying it? That might be greater than reading it. As a reminder, up until about 500 years ago, the printing press wasn't invented. So for 1,500 years, Christianity was able to flourish because the people of God lived out the realities of God. The printing press, in many ways, has helped evolutionize and revolutionize the way that Christians are able to learn and understand God. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because we got smarter, that we're actually applying those things in our lives. So having meals with my officers is one of the things I can't tell, hey, let's get together for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You let me know. I have actually, on behalf of our church, I've been allocated a specific budget. And that specific budget is for the San Fernando Police Department. I went to my leadership and I said, is it possible? We don't have these kinds of resources. I don't want to trouble the police department. I want to be a blessing to them. And because I'm there sort of as a liaison on behalf of our church, is it possible to have budget allocated so that I can take some of my officers out for coffee? I can maybe take them out for dinner. I can maybe take them out for lunch. I can maybe take them out for breakfast. And the leadership of our church says, Abe, we know that you're on mission and you really want to love and you want to reach them. And so they granted me and they allocated me that trust. So you know how neat it is for me to be able to do that with them, because through that, I'm able to model values with minimal churchy language. I'm able to observe who they are. I'm able to hear stories within those lunch meetings that I'm not privy to when we're at the station. It's a very informal meeting. I'm not there with an agenda. I don't have a sermon that I'm going to preach to them. I don't have a Bible study that we're going to do, although we're going to start to migrate toward some of that. As we grow relationally, we're also going to grow biblically with some folks. But there's so much wisdom that is shared through these lived out experiences. You see, this cultural exegesis process must end and start with relationships. It cannot be absent. So here's what I've learned, you guys. Here's some of the challenges and the lessons. That confidentiality is everything. That what you see right there is our briefing room. These guys and gals, when they come in at 0545, they come in and they change shifts. After a 12-hour shift, most of them are done with their shift. They will meet back at this room. They will brief the next group, the next team, and then they start their next 12-hour shift, assuming that you're getting off after your 12-hour shift, because you might be covering somebody else's half a shift and you're pulling an 18 that day. But confidentiality is everything. Trust is built slowly and it's built relationally. You guys, I can't tell you, Sarge just had a front row seat. People talk. That's one thing I've learned about our police department. As small as it is, they talk. They know who they like and they know who they don't like. And so far, I don't know that I'm on anybody's blacklist quite yet. So far, it's been good. But again, incarnational ministry, it requires patience. Friends, this is a process. In my mind, I am in this for the long haul. I didn't think, you know what, I'm going to be here for 1 year, and in 1 year, I want to reach, 35 people for Jesus. And that's not my metric. My metric is not how many officers I've baptized. My metric is not how many Bible studies I've conducted. My metric is not how many sermons I've preached. My metric is how many times an officer has looked me in the eye and asked me for help or has accepted something that God has put in me to give to them. That's the metric. Ministry doesn't need a mic. It needs presence. And friends, let me tell you that the only thing that I regret about this whole gig is as busy as I am. That's my regret. Because oftentimes I actually am riddled with guilt because I can't be there as often as I want to be there because of my other responsibilities. For the most part, I think they're very understanding, recognizing that I am a person who works full time and I'm raising a family and I'm married and I want to keep it that way. And I also want to keep very specific rhythms of rest in place. But here's the gospel behind the badge. This picture here, I want to share something with you. Now, this can sound like a little bit of a braggamony, but that is not the intention. In fact, let me just bridge this for you real quick before we conclude. I was awarded the Humanitarian Service Award. This is a humanitarian service ribbon. What I didn't know when I received it that night is that I was only the third person to receive this in the history of the San Fernando Police Department. When I was handed this, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, to be quite honest with you. It was humbling. I was presented this award by my reporting sarge who's here today. He said some very kind words, but I didn't know how to accept it. And here's what I mean by that, is I didn't think that I had done anything extraordinary to deserve this award. Until God revealed to me and said, Abe, it's not because of you. It's because you've done everything I've asked you to do. They, the San Fernando Police Department, don't necessarily have a biblical framework to say, oh, Abe is simply following an exegesis process to love us, to reach us, to be there for us, to try to model Jesus and love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and gentleness and empathy and sympathy and a confidential ear. There's no way to reward that or to sort of fully understand that. So I think, in my opinion, that the best way that they can sort of say thank you and acknowledge that there's a shift in culture within this person is to award me something that they esteem and they regard so highly. So, not to take anything away from it, I don't want this to sound like false humility, but I want you to understand that that is the framework that I see this in. I see a God of mercy. I see a God of redemption who has been merciful and redemptive in my life and has called me to bring about the gospel in action, not just substitutionary limited atonement, but the actual gospel, the lived out realities of justice and mercy and grace and love and servanthood in a very practical way in a police department. And the police department doesn't know how to define this or how to say thank you, then let's give this guy this service award. So I very graciously accepted, but when I accepted, I almost feel like I'm accepting it on behalf of the people of God. Because I think that any Christian who is attempting to do what I'm doing can be successful at it. I actually don't think I'm as special as a person that receives this award. I think somebody who thinks biblically, I think somebody who thinks exegetically, and I think somebody who thinks theologically can spend this amount of time in a police department and that what I'm doing can actually be replicated. It is not privy just to the San Fernando Police Department. It's not proprietary to this particular police department. I actually think that this can be duplicated. So that is a picture of yours truly, of Chaplain Abe Anaya, officially with the first badge that says chaplain on it for the San Fernando Police Department. And the reason I wanted to have this badge on here is you see this badge number 413. And when they were asked what badge number should we give the chaplain, because they had to submit for it to have this made. And somebody in the department suggested they needed a number in the 400s. And they suggested 413. Somebody asked why, and they said, let's see if he knows. So when I saw 413, I thought about Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So I asked the question because I saw 413. And that is exactly why they picked that number. So when I enter in and out of the San Fernando Police Department, because I have this badge on me, most of the time it's in my bag, I'm not in uniform. Because I have this, I constantly remember that the only way for me to do what I do is I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength and give.
How do you think your story, what you've been through, has prepared you for what you're doing now? Or do you think there is any correlation?
No, yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that I've strategically have done is I've actually have abstained from being very public with my story. For everybody that is in this room knows that I've been convicted of a federal felony. I committed an unarmed bank robbery when I was 18 years old. I was the getaway driver for my buddy, and then I actually walked into a bank with a note. For the audience member, I'm just sort of explaining what happened. I wrote a note to a teller that said, "Stay calm. I have a gun. Give me all the 20s, 50s, and hundreds." I didn't have a gun, and the way that we were going to get away with it is if somebody said, like, no, or they sounded an alarm, we would just say, "Oh, I'm kidding," because then they'd search us and there's nothing on us. Like, just kidding. I was just pranking them. Like, my friend dared me to do it. But if we got away with it, then we would come up for, with $3,000, $4,000. There's a lot of things that led up to that sort of delinquency, but nonetheless, that is the crime that I committed. And for that crime, I was sentenced to 2.5 years in a federal correctional institution. I had no prior record. I had close community ties, so they gave me the lower end of that sentencing. And so I was sentenced to 2.5 years. So I was incarcerated at an FCI low in federal prison from the age 19 to the age 21 is what Caleb is asking about. So I've been on another side of policing. I've been on another side of the justice system, and being on the other side and being on the inside of a prison system, I've been privy to a lot of things, namely the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, which that in itself was a very unique experience, to say the least. But being in federal custody and going through the Bureau of Prisons, in downtown LA at the Metropolitan Detention Center, ultimately ending up in Taft, California at Wackenut Corporations, which was a privately ran federal correctional institution. It gave me a lot of insight on humans. It was sort of a social lesson for those 2 years of understanding structures of power, structures of hierarchy, understanding and being able to identify who the most powerful person in the room was. I think in a very subversive and informal way, it helped me become more and more emotional intelligent simply because I had to learn how to survive. And so that experience, God has been able to restore and redeem it, and has given me access into people's minds and hearts um, uh, f- uh, faster, more readily in conversations and relationships, where I've learned to be able to cut through the small talk and get to the heart of matters, because that's the way things are dealt with. So because I have sort of my own experience with, being incarcerated, law enforcement, at the time, I didn't necessarily see them as the bad guy. I saw some correctional officers as bad guys, but not law enforcement as a whole. What has happened is that now that I'm part of a police department, I have noticed that there's times where those insecurities begin to creep in for me. I have noticed that there's times where imposter syndrome begins to kick in for me. All the while, God will remind me that I have restored you, I've redeemed you. That is not who you were. That is what you did. And even with this badge and this title, um, at the end of the day, you can call me an ex-con, an ex-drug addict, an ex-alcoholic, an ex-convicted felon. You can call me a pastor. You can call me a small groups director. You can call me a chaplain. You can call me a husband, a father. You can call me all of those things. But what God has revealed to me um, is that He's never actually called me to ascribe to any one of those titles. The only title that He ascribes to me is His beloved Son. His beloved Son.
I mean, you grew up there. So how much of your insight into the community was because you grew up there? How much of it was because you actually did the work, different ways? Yeah, like, you know what I mean? It's like, is it Like, how'd you do the research? Like, what's that? What's the show me under the thud.
Yeah, so the actual research is, the San Fernando Library, which is open to the public, and they have some old there's, within the San Fernando Library, um, there is a specific, historical section that is, key and lock, and, you can't check any of those books out, you can only reference them there. And so I went through some of those books to get some of the historical data that I talked about today, and they allowed me to take pictures of the stuff, so that's what I did. In terms of the actual police department, um,
That's what I'm really curious.
in terms of the actual police department, it's informal. It's informal interviews. It's asking people point blank their opinions. It's asking them for historical points. It's asking them about their story of origin within the department. And again, as you get to know police officers, again, without outing any one particular police officer, they start to divulge more and more of the story of the department. You hear remnants of past chiefs. You hear remnants of past lieutenants. You hear remnants of past officers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so part of my hardwiring is, I like to say that I have a spider web of relationships that exists in my mind, and so I'm able to pin a lot of these stories. I'm in this spider web, knowing that those stories God is going to use somehow, in one way, shape, or form, in order for me to be able to speak gospel into that particular part of it. But within the department, yeah, again, it's being attuned to what is being said to each other and to me.
What has been the one or two most surprising or unexpected things about being a chaplain at San Fernando?
Well, I would say the first one is, how well I've been able to get along with folks. I did not expect to make this much progress in this short amount of time. I was sort of prepared for 2 to 3 years of sort of knocking on doors, the doors of people's hearts. Um, so I was a little bit surprised going into it, because what had been advised by several people is that, cops they're hard, man. And it's true, but to bring it back to something Caleb had asked earlier, um, I don't I don't know how else to say it other than I'm not intimidated by a rank, or by somebody's status. And what I mean by that is, regardless of who the person is in the department, I will just speak to them directly, lovingly and respectfully, but I will speak directly. And so what really surprised me is, um, the amount of time that it took. Um, it was a lot shorter amount of time that it took to see behind the Kingston and Folks Harbor. I'd say that's one of the first things that probably was very surprising to me. The other thing that was surprising to me is how much people care about each other. I was not sure what the culture was, if it was sort of a backstabbing culture or a gossipy culture, and there's a little bit of maybe animosity, maybe some past histories with some folks. Um, but at the end of the day, our officers were under fire just over a year ago, and so much so that LAPD helicopter got called in, sheriff's department got called in, it made the media. Um, in that moment, these guys are suited and booted and ready to go. And unfortunately, I'm not disclosing anything that was not already made public. There was a guy with a pistol, and he was just firing off rounds, and he's firing them off at officers, at people, at the helicopter. He's just firing off rounds. And in listening to the officers, which goes back to the second part of the answer of like just the love for one another, is there is no doubt in my mind that all those guys that reported, they had each other's backs. There was not a man that was gonna be left behind. There's just not on their watch. And I've never been in the military. I've never been in a gang. Um, I've never been in an organization where brothers lock arms in that way, and it was beautiful to see, honestly. Yeah, that was the other thing that sort of surprised me. Yeah.
You explain like the 3-step process. Um, is that something now that you just kind of repeat, or is there like, uh, is there like a next step to that now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Don't think of it as something that is linear, and systematic. That's actually a lot more fluid. The presentation tends to be more linear, and systematic, but that is happening. All of that is happening on any given day at the same time. Okay. I'm constantly in cultural exegesis processing mode. I'm constantly learning. That is how do you nail Jello to a wall, Spencer? Yeah, you can't. You can't. It just keeps moving. So I'm not trying to figure it out more than I am being culturally aware of what's happening around me. And again, at least to this point, my memory has not failed me too much. But as I get older, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to rely on it, right? But to this point, I have a pretty good memory. I do document some things on my. I don't know why I pointed this out, on my phone. There are certain dates that I document. There are certain things that I document for myself that I journal. But if somebody comes to me, I'll give you an example. Somebody sent me a text message, and they made me aware that there was a death in their family many years ago, and that particular day was the anniversary of the death of this person from their family, and said they were having a really hard day. So I immediately stopped what I was doing, and I just start praying, and we just went back and forth via text message. And so because I knew that that was the day, I went into and I archived, on this day, on this year, so and so's relative died this way. And so I basically have a reminder, come next year, on that day, that person may or may not reach out to me, but I already have an idea of what I'm going to do that day. Oof, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, for that particular individual. So I'm constantly learning, and constantly learning what the culture is, constantly learning what individuals are going through, and then archiving some of that in a way that I can go back to it. And so just earlier today, there's a couple of, I checked in on a couple of people. And so I sort of have a running text thread with different folks regarding different needs. So I'm always in that mode. It's not I know that it appears to be a very neat process, but it's actually quite a messy process, to be honest with you. That does require a certain level of organization, um, but that cultural exegesis, I'm on that 24/7. Yeah, that's a good question, actually.
As you continue serving as a chaplain, what are some more things you want to integrate from your heart as you serve these men? Um, what do you want to see next?
Yeah, like my long-term vision.
Yeah, some of the long term stuff, some of the short term and long term, and how are you going to integrate some of this stuff?
Yeah, so I'm constantly thinking. I'm a very futurist in my thinking. The moment like is here, and then once this moment is out, like I'm already thinking about, even in this presentation, I'm already thinking about dinner, believe it or not. Okay. So is Spencer. Me too. Ideally, long term, right now, is identifying who is our peer support. Like the chaplain, he can't do it all. Who's our peer support? Who's got buy-in there? Let's identify who those people are. I got a couple names. Then, who is the mental health professional, which, by the way, just recently came on, and that's historical for the city of San Fernando, is we have a health professional, licensed LMFT. And it's like, sweet. So now we have somebody that's part of our department. This is not somebody outside of the department. Technically, yes, but no. So then it's starting to build, for me, it's starting to build an infrastructure of support for the department. But I'm just the chaplain. So I have to be patient, and that's why this requires time. I have to be patient and allow and see what God is going to do within peer support. What I can do is infuse peer support very strategically, as I've been doing. And those that are involved in peer support is to encourage them to continue. Peer support is important. When I talk to an individual, be like, yeah, man, this is why peer support is so important in our department. I don't need them to come back to the chaplain. Now that we have a mental health professional, my next step with him is going to be to set up a meeting with him, an informal meeting. Just want to introduce myself, get to know them a little bit. And again, this exegesis process, he is not exempt from it. I want to learn what makes him tick. He's an LMFT. He talks to people. And I already know I'm going to be assessed by him as I'm assessing him. And that's fine. In a very ideal scenario, peer support, mental health, and chaplain would operate and work at accomplishing similar but different goals for our officers. Because whomever you feel comfortable with, that's who you need to go to. Not everybody's going to be comfortable with me, and I respect that because I am a pastor at the end of the day. And some people are still going to be like, par for the course. He's a pastor. He sees the Bible, he sees the world through the Bible. Some will welcome that, very much so, very openly, we just sort of will welcome that. But peer support, it'll be a good, and then, but mental health professionals, that they're not popular. They're not popular amongst police officers. This is why chaplains are so important. They're more likely to talk to me because I'm doing ride-alongs, because I'm reporting to scenes, they're because I'm doing jujitsu, I'm going out to lunch with them. They're more likely to talk to me about their issues and their problems than they are with a mental health professional. However, if this mental health professional is doing what he's supposed to be doing, then it's going to be easy for me to have that buy-in and to be able to say, man, Victor, that's good. Have you thought about talking to John Doe? Now, man, I'm not going to talk to him. Chad, be like, what, try it, man. I've been to therapy. I go to therapy. Dude, there's nothing wrong with talking to LMFT. Sometimes they're able to just sort of like pick some things apart, man. Just try it. And if I could be that liaison for that officer who's never spoken or who is reluctant to speaking to a mental health professional, then that's also part of my chaplaincy. Yeah. So ideally, it's going to be to build that infrastructure, but I have to be patient with it. So being very realistic, because he just came on board, I would say that it's probably going to be at least a year before he's able to build rapport, given my experience. So there's some method to the madness. Yeah. And eventually bring on, hopefully, another chaplain. But what's really funny is I've said that, and the immediate response from some people is like, we don't need another chaplain. We got you. It's almost like, no, you're one of us. We don't need another one. Like, we're fine. We're fine. But I think it would be good for the department at some point. That is going to wrap up this year's senior capstone project. For me, Josh Buck, I apologize for this being a lot longer than I anticipated it to be. Hopefully it's a joyful watch for you and it's useful and an encouragement to you and perhaps to other members of the body of Christ. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you to all of you for being here today. That will conclude this presentation. Thank you.